400 guests watched my only daughter introduce a complete stranger as her mother while I sat at table 27 near the bathrooms. Helen Martins, had just spent half of my life savings on her wedding. Imagine watching your own daughter tell a room full of people that you're dead while she hugs another woman and calls her mom. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are traveling. It all started 8 months ago when Julia announced her engagement to Tyler Mendez, the son of one of the biggest businessmen in Chicago. As a single mother who raised my daughter working day and night as an accountant, I was happy for her. Julia always dreamed of a different life from ours, and I never blamed her for that. When she asked me to help with the wedding costs, I didn't hesitate. I opened my savings, the ones I kept for 30 years for my retirement, and promised her the wedding of her dreams. $400,000. My entire life's effort transformed into flowers, champagne, and an imported designer dress. During the preparations, I started to notice changes in her behavior. Julia asked me not to attend the meetings with the planners. "It would be better if you just sign the checks, Mom. Let me handle the details." She canceled our traditional Sunday lunch and rarely answered my calls. Then one day I received a golden envelope in the mail. It was the invitation to my own daughter's wedding with my name handwritten. Helen Martins, table 27. I found it strange not to be at the main table, but I thought maybe it was some high society protocol I didn't know. The day before the wedding, I received a message from Julia. "Mom, please, when people ask about your job, just say you're a business owner, okay? Don't mention accounting." That message hurt, but I swallowed my pride. After all, it was her day. The wedding took place at the Oaks Estate, the most luxurious venue in Lake Geneva. I arrived alone wearing the navy blue dress I had bought especially for the occasion. 3 months' salary on a piece of fabric that Julia had approved after rejecting 5 other models. The hostess guided me to my table so far from the center that I could barely see the main stage. I was sitting with people I didn't know, distant relatives of the groom, and some employees from his father's company. It was during the cocktail hour that I heard it for the first time. An elegant lady asked Julia about her family. "My mother passed away when I was 15 ans," my daughter said with tears in her eyes, rehearsed tears. "It was very hard, but my Aunt Christine raised me as if I were her own daughter." She pointed to a woman in her 50s, perfectly dyed hair and jewels that sparkled more than the ballroom chandelier. Christine smiled and hugged my daughter. A hug that seemed practiced, as if they had rehearsed that scene. I was paralyzed. The champagne glass I was holding slipped from my fingers, shattering on the marble floor. A few people looked but soon returned to their conversations. I was invisible in that environment, just another unimportant guest. My daughter was 24, I was 46. I was very much alive, paying $400,000 for the privilege of seeing my own death announced at the wedding I financed. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was referring to someone else. But then it happened again and again. For every person who asked about her family, Julia told the same sad story. The dead mother, the kind aunt who raised her, the personal triumph. The world spun around me. 30 years raising that girl. 30 years of daily sacrifices. I had given up relationships, travel, personal comfort, so she could have everything I didn't. Private school, a semester abroad, a top-tier university, and now in the moment that should have been ours, she chose to erase me from the story. The worst part was that this Christine person didn't even exist in her life until recently. I found out later she was Tyler's godmother, a local socialite who opened the doors of high society to my daughter. The price? Apparently it was the elimination of the accountant mother from the neighborhood. During dinner, I watched Julia circle the room elegant in her $45,000 dress that I had paid for. She had transformed into someone else. Her gestures, her way of speaking, even her laugh sounded different. More restrained, more sophisticated, more fake. The groom's father stood up to make a toast. Edward Mendez, a businessman, known for his coldness in deals, now seemed emotional speaking about the new family member. "Julia," he said, raising his glass. "You are an example of strength and determination. Losing your mother so young and still becoming this extraordinary woman. I am sure she would be proud of you today." The room erupted in applause. Julia cried gracefully, leaning on Christine, her supposed second mother. The charade was so well executed, I almost believed it. At that moment, my phone vibrated. It was a message from the event coordinator, Patricia Oliver, with whom I had been dealing directly about the payments. Mrs. Helen, we need the final deposit of $150,000 to release the dinner service and the party. As agreed, the deadline is 9 p.m. I looked at the clock, 8:40 p.m. I looked at my daughter, living her fantasy at the cost of my sacrifice. I looked at that stranger who had usurped my place. And then I made a decision that would change everything. I was never a vengeful person. In fact, I was always known for my patience and ability to forgive. When Julia's father left us when she was only 3, I didn't curse him or try to harm him. I just moved on, determined to give my daughter a decent life. I worked overtime. I took accounting projects on weekends. I saved every possible penny. Our 2-bedroom apartment in the Lincoln Square neighborhood wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, cozy, and full of love. At least that's what I thought. Now sitting at table 27 with Patricia's message flashing on my phone screen, I wondered if all that love had meant anything to Julia, if all those sacrifices had been worth it. I took a deep breath and wrote my reply. Patricia, there has been a change of plans. I will not be making the final deposit. Her response was almost instantaneous. Mrs. Helen, this is very serious. Without the final payment, we will have to interrupt the service. The guests are already being served. I understand, I replied, but the contract states that the final payment is conditional on my satisfaction with the event, and I am not satisfied. As I put the phone back in my bag, I saw Julia in the center of the room posing for photos with the Mendez family and Christine, her new family. The photographer asked them to get closer, to smile more, to look more united. The perfect scene for the Chicago social pages. She never once looked in my direction. She never once seemed to worry about her real mother sitting alone at the table of the forgotten. 20 minutes later, Patricia appeared by my side, visibly nervous. Mrs. Helen, we need to speak in private. I followed her to a small room at the back of the hall where she kept her makeshift office. Her expression was a mix of confusion and professional panic. Ma'am, I don't understand what's happening. The party is going perfectly. Yes, it is, I agreed. A perfect party where my daughter is telling everyone I'm dead. Patricia turned pale. I'm sorry, exactly what you heard. My daughter, that radiant bride out there, is introducing another woman as her mother. She's saying I died when she was 15. But why apparently being the daughter of a common accountant isn't sophisticated enough for the Mendez family? Patricia looked genuinely shocked. In her 10 years organizing luxury weddings, she had probably never faced a situation like this. Mrs. Helen, I am so sorry. This is terrible, but the contract clearly states that the final payment is conditional on my satisfaction, and I am not satisfied paying for my own humiliation. I left the room, leaving Patricia with her professional dilemma. I returned to my table, watching as the event continued to flow smoothly, for now. At 9:10 p.m., I noticed the first signs of confusion. The waiters stopped serving dinner. The catering team began collecting some trays that had not yet been distributed. The band stopped in the middle of a song. Patricia went on stage and whispered something in the ear of the master of ceremonies, who looked equally concerned. They both looked in my direction and then began circulating the room, speaking discreetly with the service team supervisors. Edward Mendez noticed the strange movement and approached the master of ceremonies. The conversation was brief, but I could see from his body language that he was not happy with what he was hearing. Julia was still mingling with the guests, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind the scenes. Her fairy tale dream was still intact, but not for long. Meanwhile, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Regina Sanders. Regina, it's me, Helen. I need you at the Oaks estate now. Julia's wedding, did something happen? Yes, and I need you to witness a few things and bring those documents we prepared as a precaution. Regina was more than my lawyer. She was a friend of decades who knew my relationship with Julia well. She had helped me draft the wedding contract, insisting on protection clauses that I at the time considered unnecessary. Now I was grateful for her foresight. "I'm on my way," she said. At 9:30 p.m., the mood in the room had completely changed. What was once an elegant celebration now had an air of contained tension. Guests began to realize something was wrong. Dinner service had been interrupted, mid-meal drinks were not being refilled, and there were murmurs among the staff. Edward Mendez appeared abruptly at my side, with Patricia nervously in tow. "You must be Helen Martins," he said without offering his hand. His tone was polite but cold. "Yes, I am, the mother of the bride, the one who's still alive." He ignored my provocation. "Patricia informs me there is a problem with the final payment." "There's no problem at all. I simply decided not to make the payment." "Why?" "Because I don't pay for lies, Mr. Mendez, especially not ones that kill me off." Edward looked confused, so I elaborated. "Your future daughter-in-law has been telling all the guests that I died when she was 15, that she was raised by a certain Christine, who, from what I understand, is your son's godmother." His face turned red, but not with shame, with restrained anger. "This is ridiculous. Why would she say something like that? Ask her. Or better yet, ask yourself and your family what you did to make her feel she needed to lie about her origins." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Look, Mrs. Martins, I don't know what's going on between you and your daughter, but this is not the time or place. We have 400 guests here, including very important people. Make the payment, and we'll sort this out later." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "It's a simple word, Mr. Mendez. It means I do not agree to do what you are asking." He switched tactics. "How much do you want, ma'am, to resolve this now without a scandal?" That took me by surprise. Did he really think this was about money? "Mr. Mendez, you don't understand. I don't want more money. I've already spent $250,000 on this wedding. What I want is for my daughter to acknowledge the truth, to admit who I really am." Edward looked at me as if I were a creature from another planet. In his view, everything in life could be solved with money. Problems were just figures not yet negotiated. "Are you willing to ruin your own daughter's wedding over hurt pride?" "No, Mr. Mendez. I am willing to teach my daughter that there are consequences for the choices we make, that we can't just erase the people who raised us when they don't fit the image we want to project." He shook his head, incredulous. "You have no idea the scandal this is going to cause." "Actually, I do. And the responsibility isn't mine. It's your daughter-in-law's. She chose to lie. She chose to erase me. Now she's going to face what happens when the truth comes out." Edward walked away, determined to resolve the situation his way. I saw him head towards a group of men in suits, probably partners or executives from his company. I heard snippets of the conversation. They were discussing the possibility of making an emergency payment to save the party. But there was a problem. The contract was in my name. Every vendor had specific instructions to accept modifications only with my express authorization. Edward Mendez might be powerful in his business circles, but here at this party, I was in control. Regina arrived at 9:45 p.m., elegant in her gray suit carrying a briefcase with the documents I had requested. She sat next to me at table 27, quickly assessing the situation. "So she really did it," Regina commented, observing Julia on the other side of the room. "When you told me your suspicions, I thought you were exaggerating." "I wanted to be too," I replied. Regina opened her briefcase and discreetly spread some papers on the table. "Here is the original contract with the Oaks estate, your signature on every page. Here are the transfer receipts for the initial $250,000. And here are the emails between you and Patricia about the final payment agreement." I nodded, feeling a weight in my chest, seeing all the documentation for what should have been the happiest day of my life. "What do you plan to do now?" Regina asked. Wait. Wait for what?" "For the truth to come out. I'm not going to confront her in front of everyone. She created this situation, now she'll have to manage it." We didn't have to wait long. At 10 p.m., the crisis reached a critical point. The DJ stopped playing. The lights, which had been programmed to create a soft, romantic atmosphere, returned to normal, harsher, less welcoming illumination. Waiters began collecting glasses and plates, even from those who were still eating. Patricia went on stage again, this time with the microphone in hand. Her professionalism was being tested to the maximum. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience. We are facing some technical difficulties. Service will be briefly interrupted while we resolve the situation." The guests began to murmur. Some laughed nervously. Others looked irritated. The magic of the night was rapidly dissipating. Julia ran towards the stage, visibly alarmed. "What is happening?" she asked Patricia, but the microphone was still on and everyone heard. "Julia, we need to talk in private," Patricia replied, trying to turn off the mic, but it was too late. Edward Mendez and his wife Monica quickly joined them on stage, followed by Tyler, who looked completely confused by the turn of events. Christine, the fake mother, remained seated at the main table, looking around as if searching for an emergency exit. Regina leaned towards me. "Now would be a good time to intervene, don't you think?" "Not yet," I replied. "Let them try to sort it out among themselves first." We watched the small group on stage in an intense discussion. Edward gestured emphatically. Monica looked horrified. Patricia maintained a professional calm, but her eyes kept darting towards my table. Julia looked devastated, searching frantically around the room, perhaps finally looking for me. Our eyes met briefly. She turned even paler. Finally, Edward took the microphone. "Dear guests, I apologize for the disruption. We are facing a small administrative issue with the venue. Nothing to worry about. If you can give us a few minutes of patience, we will resolve everything quickly." But his efforts were in vain. The vendors were already following the early shutdown protocol provided for in the contract. The lighting team began to dismantle some equipment. The florists appeared to collect the most expensive arrangements before something happened to them. Christine finally got up and walked towards the stage, joining the conversation. I saw her gesture in my direction, probably identifying me for the others. "I think it's time," Regina said. I nodded, and we stood up, walking slowly towards the stage. The room grew quieter as we approached. The guests, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen, turned their attention towards us. When we reached the small group, Julia was crying openly. "Mom, please," she begged. "Please don't do this." Edward looked surprised to hear Julia call me Mom, after apparently confirming with Patricia that I was who I said I was. "So, you really are her mother?" he said, as if he still didn't quite believe it. "Yes, Mr. Mendez, the living mother, not the deceased one." Julia sobbed harder. "Can I explain?" "You don't need to explain to me," I replied. "Maybe you should explain to your guests why you lied about me, or to your husband and in-laws why you started your marriage with such a fundamental lie." Tyler looked at Julia as if he had never seen her before. "You said your mother was dead." He spoke slowly. "You cried when you told me that story. You took me to visit a grave in the cemetery. That took me by surprise. Had she gone so far as to take Tyler to a cemetery? Whose grave had she shown him?" "She told me the same thing," added Monica Mendez, indignation clear in her voice. "She told us how hard it was to grow up without a mother, how she suffered the loss." Christine remained silent, her face a mask of discomfort. She clearly knew the truth, or at least part of it, and had still agreed to participate in the farce. "Julia," I said, keeping my voice firm but low, so that only our small group could hear. "You have two choices now. You can continue with this lie and watch your wedding end before it really begins, or you can tell the truth and try to repair the damage you caused." She looked at me, her eyes red from crying, the perfect makeup now smudged. "Why are you doing this to me?" The question hit me like a slap. Did she really not understand? After everything she had done, did she see herself as the victim? "I'm not doing anything to you, Julia. You did this to yourself when you decided I wasn't good enough to be part of your big day. When you decided to symbolically kill me so you could reinvent your story." Edward intervened again, the businessman to the end. "Let's resolve this like adults. How much do you want to make the final payment and let this party continue?" Regina stepped forward, holding the contract. "Mr. Mendez, as Mrs. Helen's lawyer, I must inform you that this is not a negotiation." The contract is clear. The final payment is conditional on the client's satisfaction, which is my client, and she has every right to be dissatisfied. Edward looked at the paper as if it were a personal offense. This is absurd. We can cover the amount. Name your price. It's not about money, I insisted. It's about respect, about the truth. The guests, perceiving that something serious was happening, began to move closer to the stage. Some already had their phones out, probably recording. This was no longer a private crisis. It was about to become a public spectacle. Tyler, who until then had seemed stunned, finally reacted. He turned to Julia, his expression a mixture of confusion and betrayal. Why would you lie about something like that? Why invent that your mother was dead? Julia looked at him, then at me, then at Christine, who was now intently studying the floor. Trapped in her own web of lies, she finally spoke the truth. I wanted to fit in, she whispered, but the silence in the room was so complete that everyone heard. I wanted to be part of this family, of this world. And my mother, she's just a regular accountant. She doesn't frequent the same places. She doesn't know the same people. When I met Christine, and she offered to introduce me as her niece, Tyler took a step back, as if needing physical distance from the woman he had just married. You lied about who you are, about your own family. What else did you lie about? The silence that followed Tyler's question was dense, almost palpable. 400 people holding their breath, simultaneously waiting for Julia's answer. But she had no answer, only silent tears running down her carefully made-up face. It was Christine who broke the silence. Julia didn't lie about anything else, she said, finally finding her voice. She just adapted her story to be more acceptable in our circles. Monica Mendez shot a frosty look at her friend. You knew this all along. You participated in this charade? Christine had the decency to look ashamed. At first, it was just a small tweak to the story. Julia asked me to introduce her as my niece at a few events. Then, when you all met her, the story evolved. Evolved! Tyler's voice was laden with disbelief. How does it evolve to making me visit the grave of a person who isn't even dead? I finally found my voice. It was time to end this painful scene. Julia, I spoke in a tone that allowed no argument. You are going to go up on that stage right now and tell all your guests the truth. You are going to explain who I really am and apologize for the theater you created. Or this party officially ends and you will have to explain to everyone why your dream wedding was over before the honeymoon even began. Julia looked at me with pleading eyes. In that moment, I saw the little girl again who used to run into my arms when I came home from work. The teenager who woke me up on Sundays to make pancakes together. The young woman who hugged me crying when she was accepted into college. Somewhere behind the lies and the superficiality, the daughter I raised still existed. At least that's what I wanted to believe. After a long moment, Julia wiped her tears, squared her shoulders, and walked to the center of the stage. Patricia handed her the microphone, her expression mixing pity with professional relief that the crisis was potentially being resolved. Good evening, everyone. Julia began, her voice trembling. I need to confess something. The room was in absolute silence. Even the staff stopped what they were doing to listen. I lied to you. I lied to my husband, to my in-laws, to our friends. She took a deep breath. My mother is not dead. In fact, she is here today. A murmur went through the crowd. That woman over there, she pointed at me, is Helen Martins, my mother. She is an accountant, not a business owner. She lives in a simple apartment in Lincoln Square, not in a mansion on the Gold Coast. And she, her voice broke, she paid for every single cent of this wedding. Several heads turned to look at me. I felt the weight of hundreds of curious gazes, some compassionate, others judgmental. I was ashamed. Julia continued, the words now tumbling out. Ashamed of not coming from an influential family like Tyler's. Ashamed of having grown up with financial struggles. Ashamed of being just ordinary. She looked directly at me. And in the process of trying to become someone I'm not, I deeply hurt the person who loved me most in this life, who sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had. The tears were falling freely now, and her voice was choked. Mom, I'm sorry. I am so, so sorry. I know an apology isn't enough for what I did. I didn't just lie about you. I denied everything you represent, everything you taught me about integrity and honesty. She turned back to the guests. To all of you, I apologize for the embarrassment. To the Mendez family, I hope you can forgive me for starting our relationship with such a grave lie. And to my husband, she looked at Tyler, who remained impassive. I don't even know what to say. I hope that one day you can understand that this doesn't reflect who I really am deep down. The silence that followed was heavy-laden with unexpressed judgments and contained reactions. Finally, Patricia took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia continued, trying to regain control of the situation. While we resolve these matters, we ask you to enjoy the ambient music. Service will resume shortly. But the damage was done. The festive mood had transformed into something entirely different. Groups of guests whispered among themselves, casting curious glances in our direction. Some were already beginning to gather their belongings, preparing for a discreet exit. Julia came down from the stage looking smaller and more fragile than ever. The luxurious dress now seemed to weigh tons on her shoulders. Tyler remained apart, conferring with his parents in a corner. His body language said it all. Arms crossed, jaw tight, quick, distrustful glances towards his wife. Christine had completely disappeared, probably looking for the fastest, most discreet way out of this social scandal. Regina touched my arm gently. Helen, what do you want to do now? We can still maintain the refusal of payment, or we can release it with some conditions. I looked at my daughter, so small and lost in the middle of that huge ballroom. The rage I felt had been partially subdued by her public confession. It still hurt, of course. Some wounds would take a long time to heal if they ever did completely. I'm going to talk to her, I told Regina. Alone. I walked towards Julia, who remained alone in the center of the room, as if trapped on an island of shame and regret. When she saw me approaching, she seemed to fear what was coming next. Mom, she began, but I raised my hand, asking for silence. Not here. Let's talk somewhere more private. I headed towards the same room where I had spoken with Patricia earlier. Julia followed me, her wedding dress making a soft sound as it dragged across the marble floor. Inside the small room, far from the curious eyes, we were finally face to face. Mother and daughter. Two women who now seemed like strangers to each other. Why? I asked simply. It was the only question that really mattered. Julia collapsed into a chair, her dress spreading around her like a cloud of silk and tulle. I don't know how to explain it in a way that makes sense, she said quietly. It started as something small. When I met Tyler, he assumed I came from a wealthy family because of the college I went to, the clothes I wore. And I didn't correct him. You always had good clothes, I commented. I made sure of that. I know, Mom. You always did everything for me. And she swallowed hard. I repaid you by erasing you from my life. It wasn't just that, Julia. You killed me. In every story you told, I was dead. She nodded, unable to look me in the eye. When I met Tyler's parents, the lie just grew. They talked about international trips, properties, investments. I wanted to belong to that world. I wanted them to accept me as an equal. And you thought the daughter of an accountant would never be accepted. It's not just that. The way they talk, how they behave. It's a different world, Mom. A world that people like us don't easily enter. People like us, I repeated slowly. People who work hard, who build their lives with honesty. Is that what you're ashamed of? She finally looked up, her eyes red. I got lost, Mom. Somewhere between meeting Tyler and today, I got completely lost. I started to believe I needed to be someone else, to be loved, to be valued. I sat next to her, feeling a confusing mix of anger and compassion. Part of me wanted to hug her like when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. Another part wanted to shake her until she understood the gravity of what she had done. Julia, I always taught you to be proud of who you are, of where you come from. There was never a lack of love in our house, even when money was tight. I know, she whispered, and that's the worst part. I didn't do it because you were a bad mother. I did it because I was weak, because I let other people define what has value. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. The money I paid for this wedding, I began. It wasn't just money. It was my retirement. It was years of extra work, of careful savings. It was the future I planned for myself. Her eyes widened in shock. Your retirement? But why didn't you tell me? Because you were so happy, so excited. Because I wanted to give you the wedding of your dreams. Because I'm your mother, and that's what mothers do. They sacrifice for their children. The tears returned with full force. And I threw it all away. For nothing. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the consequences hanging between us. Outside, we could hear the muffled sound of people leaving, of cars being brought by the valets, of a celebration crumbling. What happens now? She finally asked. It was a complex question with many layers. What would happen to the wedding, to her relationship with Tyler, to our relationship? Honestly, I don't know, I replied. Some things can't be undone with a simple apology. Are you going to make the final payment so the party can continue? I looked at her with a mix of surprise and disappointment. After everything that had happened, her concern was still the party. Julia, do you really think there's a party left to continue? Look around. Your husband is conferring with his parents about what to do with you. The guests are leaving. The farce is over. She lowered her head, defeated. You're right. I'm being ridiculous. Another knock on the door. It was Regina. Helen, the Mendez family wants to talk to you. They are suggesting an agreement. I turned my attention back to Julia. You have a choice to make now. You can keep trying to be someone you're not, or you can start the journey of rediscovering who you really are, who you always were. I got up and headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. As for the final payment, I'll make it, on one condition. What? She asked, a spark of hope in her tired eyes. That you be honest with your husband, completely honest, about everything, and that you start building your marriage on the truth, not on fantasies. I followed Regina to a small office on the other side of the ballroom where the Mendez family had set up as if conducting an emergency business meeting. Edward was on the phone speaking quickly in a low voice. Monica was typing furiously on her cell phone, probably trying to control the damage on social media. Tyler was sitting alone in a corner staring blankly at the wall. When I entered, Edward hung up the phone immediately. Mrs. Martins, thank you for coming, he said in a tone that suggested we were in a corporate negotiation and not in the middle of a family drama. We would like to propose an amicable solution to this situation. I'm listening, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. First, we understand your outrage. What Julia did was unacceptable. He paused, probably expecting me to nod or thank him for the acknowledgement. I remained silent. Second, he continued, we are willing to cover the final payment. Immediate transfer to the vendors. We can resolve this right now. And what do you want in return? I asked, because with people like Edward Mendez, there was always something in return. Discretion, Monica replied, speaking for the first time. We want this to end here. No lawsuits, no media, no further scandal. And Julia, I asked, what about her? An uncomfortable silence hung in the room. The three Mendez exchanged quick glances. That is something Tyler and Julia will have to resolve between themselves, Edward said finally. As a family, we will support whatever decision our son makes. I looked at Tyler, who was still silent, his expression unreadable. And what is your decision, Tyler? You just married my daughter. A few hours ago, you were exchanging vows, promising eternal love, and now... He finally looked at me, his eyes reflecting a storm of conflicting emotions. I don't know, he answered honestly. I don't know if I can trust her now. I don't know if I even know the person I married. You don't, I nodded, surprising everyone. You only know the version of her that was created to please you and your family. The real Julia is much more complex. She has flaws like all of us. She makes terrible mistakes, as we saw today. But she also has qualities that you never saw because you were too busy admiring the facade. Tyler seemed to genuinely consider my words. What qualities? He asked, his voice softer. She's resilient. She grew up without a father in a home with financial limitations and still excelled in her studies. She got into one of a top university on her own merit, not connections. She's creative. She has a wonderful sense of humor when she's comfortable and a generous heart when she's not trying to impress anyone. I paused, realizing I was defending my daughter after everything that had happened. Motherly love was a truly complex thing. But the choice is yours, Tyler. Only you can decide if you want to get to know the real Julia, or if you prefer to end this marriage before it really begins. Edward cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the sentimental turn of the conversation. Returning to the issue of payment, Regina intervened. My client is willing to authorize the final payment on a few conditions. What conditions? Edward asked, his born negotiator tone returning. First, a formal agreement that you will not try to hold Helen responsible for any public embarrassment resulting from this situation. Second, that Julia and Tyler have the opportunity to talk honestly, without family pressure, before making any decisions about the future of the marriage. Edward frowned. The non-liability agreement must be mutual. We don't want any subsequent lawsuits from your client. Fair. Regina nodded. As for the conversation between the couple, Edward looked at his son. Tyler is an adult. He can make his own decisions. Tyler stood up suddenly. I want to talk to Julia. Now. His determination surprised me. Maybe there was more to Tyler Mendez than the privileged young man I imagined. She's in the room near the kitchen, I informed him. Tyler left without saying another word, leaving us with the uncomfortable silence again. Well, Edward said quickly, returning to business mode. Shall we finalize this agreement then? While Regina and the Mendes family discussed the legal details, my mind drifted to Julia and Tyler. What were they talking about? Was there any chance of reconciliation after such a fundamental betrayal? After about 20 minutes, the terms were agreed upon. I would authorize the final payment. The party could resume, although many guests had already left, and we would all commit to maintaining discretion about the night's events. Patricia was called in to coordinate the resumption of services if possible. Some vendors have already left, she informed us, but the main catering team and the DJ are still here. We can offer a reduced service if the couple wishes to continue. If the couple wishes to continue. The phrase hung in the air like an unanswered question. I decided to go back to the main ballroom to see how things were. The atmosphere had changed drastically. Of the original 400 guests, perhaps 150 remained gathered in small circles, conversing in low voices. The atmosphere of luxurious celebration had been replaced by something more akin to the scene after a natural disaster. People trying to understand what happened, checking the damage, deciding how to proceed. Christine had reappeared and was talking to a small group of elegant women, probably trying to control the damage to her own social reputation. When she saw me, she quickly looked away and moved off. Some guests looked at me with curiosity, others with sympathy. Few dared to approach, unsure how to react to the mother who had been resurrected in the middle of the wedding. An older woman, however, came straight to me. I recognized her as Tyler's grandmother, a woman in her 80s, who had been treated with special deference throughout the ceremony. Mrs. Martins, she said, her voice firm despite her advanced age. I would like to tell you that I admire your courage. Thank you, I replied, surprised by the direct approach. My grandson may have married a liar, but at least she has a mother with character. She continued, a faint smile on her thin lips. In this society, that's already something rare. Before I could respond, she walked away, leaning on her elegant cane. I stood there in the middle of the semi-empty ballroom, feeling strangely out of place. It was as if I were a character in a movie who had gone off script, improvising on a set that no longer made sense. It was then that I saw Julia and Tyler emerging from the room where they had been talking. They weren't holding hands, but they were walking side by side without the hostile distance from before. Both of their faces were serious, but the previous anger or despair was gone. They headed straight for me. "Mom," Julia began, her voice hoarse from crying. "Tyler and we talked. A lot." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "We decided we're going to postpone the honeymoon and—" She looked at Tyler, who completed, "We're going to try marriage counseling. I can't promise that our marriage will survive this, but I think we at least owe it to ourselves to try to understand what happened and see if there's a path forward." It was more than I expected, honestly. In many families like the Mendes, the scandal would be reason enough for an immediate annulment. "That's a wise decision," I commented. "And the party?" Julia looked around at the empty room at the few remaining guests. "I think the party is over, Mom, but if you can make the final payment so the vendors don't get hurt." Her request wasn't to save the celebration, but to honor the commitments, a small sign of maturity emerging from the chaos. "It's already being handled," I informed her. "Regina is finalizing the details with your in-laws." "Thank you," she said softly. "I know I don't deserve it after what I did." "It's not about deserving it, Julia. It's about responsibility. I made a commitment to these vendors, and I'm going to honor my word. Something I hope you learn to value too." Tyler looked at me with something close to respect. "Mrs. Martins, I would like to get to know you better. The real mother of Julia, not the invented version I was presented with." "I'd like that too, Tyler, but I suggest we start after you two have had time to process all of this." He nodded, seeming relieved not to have to deal with another layer of emotional complexity at that moment. Regina appeared at my side, reporting that everything was resolved. The payment would be processed, the confidentiality agreements were signed, and the vendors who stayed would receive instructions to resume service on a reduced scale. "Now?" Julia asked, looking completely lost. But it offered a decent salary, and most importantly, the chance to build a career on her own merit. Every month, faithfully, she transferred a part of her income to my account, slowly rebuilding the savings I had sacrificed. Tyler surprisingly supported her decision to work. He himself had gone through a sort of transformation, questioning many of the values he had been raised with. They moved out of the luxurious apartment Edward had given them as a wedding gift to a smaller, more modest place downtown. The Mendes family, of course, didn't understand this regression, as they called it. For them, it was inconceivable that their son and daughter-in-law would choose to live with less when they could have more. But Tyler was discovering an independence he had never experienced before, and he seemed to value it more than the privileges he had grown up with. As for me, I returned to my routine but with a new perspective. The wedding incident had made me question many things. How had I raised Julia? What values had I really passed on if I had perhaps unintentionally fueled her insecurities by overemphasizing the importance of education and social mobility? Our relationship was healing slowly. We had dinner together once a week, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Tyler too. We talked about things we had never discussed before. Her deep insecurities, my own regrets as a mother, our fears and hopes for the future. On one of those nights, after a particularly pleasant dinner at my apartment, Julia handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a gift card for a luxury spa in Cancun, valid for a full weekend with all treatments included. "Julia, this must have cost a fortune." "It was my first bonus at work," she explained. "I wanted you to have something special, something just for you." I was moved by the gesture, but also concerned. "Shouldn't you be saving?" "I am, but this is important." "You always put my needs ahead of yours. It's time for you to take care of yourself a little." I accepted the gift with gratitude, recognizing the growth it represented. Julia, thinking of someone else's needs before her own. The following weekend, I enjoyed my time at the spa, allowing myself the luxury of being pampered for a few hours. It was during a relaxing massage that I realized something fundamental. In my entire adult life, I had rarely done anything exclusively for my own pleasure. There was always a practical justification, a need to attend to, usually related to Julia or work. That revelation led me to a deeper reflection. Maybe I, too, had contributed to the dysfunctional dynamic that had developed between us. By constantly sacrificing my own needs, I had inadvertently taught Julia that a person's value was in their utility to others, not in who they intrinsically were. The following week, I invited Julia to another of our dinners. This time, however, I had something important to discuss. I've been thinking, I began, after we finished dessert, about the wedding money. Julia tensed immediately. I know I still have a lot to pay, but I'm being consistent. That's not it, I interrupted gently. I want you to stop paying me. What? But Mom, I need to do this. It's a matter of responsibility. I agree that it's important for you to take responsibility for what happened, but I think there are other ways to do it besides just transferring money every month. She looked confused. Like what? Like building an authentic life, like being honest with yourself and with others, like working on your marriage based on truth, not fantasies. But the money, it was my retirement. It was, but I'm discovering that maybe I don't want to retire so soon. I'm thinking of opening my own accounting consultancy for small businesses, something I always wanted to do but never had the courage. Her eyes widened. Seriously? That's amazing, Mom! What I'm trying to say is that money represented a specific version of the future I had imagined for myself, but maybe there are other possible futures, even better ones. Julia processed my words slowly. So you're releasing me from the debt? Not exactly. I'm redefining how you can pay it. I don't want your money, Julia. I want you to live with integrity. I want you to build a marriage and a life based on who you really are, not on who you think you should be. That would be the real restitution. She was silent for a long moment. That seems harder than just paying the money. It is. Much harder. It's a life's work. And if I fail, then you try again. That's how it works. The following Sunday, I received an unexpected call from Monica Mendez, inviting me for tea at her house. I was intrigued and a bit apprehensive, but I accepted the invitation. The Mendez mansion was exactly as I imagined. Elegant, impeccably decorated, imposing. Monica received me with formal cordiality, leading me to a terrace overlooking the immaculate garden. I appreciate you coming, Mrs. Martins, she said as a maid served tea in delicate porcelain cups. I was intrigued by the invitation, I replied honestly. Monica nodded, taking a small sip before speaking. I wanted to thank you personally. Thank me for what? For raising a daughter who, despite her errors in judgment, has a fundamentally good character, and for helping our son find a more authentic path for himself. It was not what I expected to hear. Tyler is different, she continued, in a good way, although disconcerting for us. He's questioning things we always took for granted, making decisions we would never consider, including distancing himself a bit from us. I'm sorry if this is causing tension in your family. Don't be. Edward and I realized that perhaps we were excessively controlling. We created an environment where our son felt he needed to meet certain expectations to be valued. She paused significantly. Not unlike what you described about Julia in certain aspects. The observation was insightful and unexpected. There was a parallel, albeit in drastically different contexts. Both Julia and Tyler had felt the pressure to be who others wanted them to be. She to ascend socially, he to maintain the privileged status quo. They are discovering who they really are, I commented. Together. Yes, and as much as it worries us to see Tyler give up certain comforts, there is also something admirable in the independence he is seeking. We talked for another hour, two women from completely different worlds discovering unexpected common ground, the love for our children and the desire to see them happy, even if it meant they would follow different paths than those we had imagined for them. The following week, at our now traditional family dinner, Julia and Tyler had news to share. We're thinking of having a small vow renewal ceremony, Tyler announced. Something simple, just with the people who really matter to us. A chance to start over, Julia added, this time based on the truth. That sounds wonderful, I replied, genuinely happy for them. And we wanted you to be our witness, Helen, Tyler said, using my first name for the first time. If you're willing. The gesture meant a lot, not just the invitation itself, but the implicit recognition of my place in their lives. "It would be an honor," I replied. The ceremony took place a month later at a small beachfront restaurant in Cancun. Only 20 guests. Close friends, some selected family, including the Mendez family, who seemed uncomfortable with the simplicity of the event, but made an effort to be supportive. Julia didn't wear a designer dress this time. She opted for a simple white knee-length dress with flowers in her loose hair. Tyler skipped the formal tux for a light suit appropriate for the seaside occasion. The vows they exchanged were written by them, honest and direct. They spoke about mistakes made, lessons learned, and the commitment to build a relationship based on truth, not just with each other, but with themselves. "I promise to never again try to be someone I'm not," Julia said, her voice firm and clear. "I promise to bring the authentic person I'm discovering to our marriage with all her imperfections and insecurities. And I promise to create a space where you can be exactly who you are," Tyler replied, "where we can both grow as individuals, not just as a couple." As I watched the scene, I felt an emotion different from anything I had experienced at the original wedding. It wasn't the superficial admiration for a luxurious spectacle, but something deeper. The recognition that I was witnessing something genuine, something real. During the simple reception that followed, Julia approached me with a glass of champagne in hand. "Are you okay, Mom? You look emotional." "I am," I admitted, "but in a good way. I'm proud of you, Ju. Not for the dress you're wearing or the impression you're making, but for the hard work you've done. On yourself, on your marriage." "Thanks," she said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "That's not true. You would have found your way eventually." "Maybe, but it would have been much harder." She paused, looking at the guests, chatting and laughing around her. "You know what's funny? This wedding cost 1/100th of the first one, and it's infinitely happier. Some things can't be bought no matter how much money you spend." That's a lesson I was slow to learn. We watched Tyler talking with his parents on the other side of the room. There was a new confidence in his posture, a security that came not from his last name or bank account, but from conscious, authentic choices. "You two are going to be okay," I affirmed. "How do you know?" "Because you're both doing the real work now, the work that matters." The next morning, I woke up early and went to the terrace of my apartment with a cup of coffee in hand. Life had taken unexpected turns in recent months. What began as a painful betrayal had transformed into an opportunity for growth for all of us. Julia was discovering who she really was without the social masks she had worn for so long. Tyler was questioning the values he had been raised with, seeking a more authentic path. Even the Mendez family was forced to reconsider some of their assumptions about status and appearances. And I was learning that some wounds, even the deepest ones, can become portals to a new understanding. That forgiveness is not a single event, but an ongoing process. That sometimes when something breaks completely, the reconstruction can create something stronger and more beautiful than the original. The following week, I signed the lease for the small office where I would open my accounting consultancy. It was a modest start, but it was genuine. A new chapter, not just for me, but for our entire family. Imperfect, complicated, but finally real. My daughter's wedding had begun with a devastating lie, but it had transformed into a path of truth and reconnection. And that I realized was worth far more than all the crystal chandeliers and imported champagne money could buy. Now, if you liked this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to join as a member to get access to exclusive videos I don't post here. I'll be waiting for you there.